What's going on, guys? Welcome back to part 2 of a series where we'll be building a social media with React and Django. In part 1 we created our user profile API and user profile page, so if you haven't seen that video you're going to want to check it out. But in this video we're going to be building our secure authentication system, and by the end of the video a user will be able to create an account with our register page as well as log into an account with our login page, so a user won't be able to access data like this unless they are logged in, okay? To authenticate a user, we're using something called JWT tokens and storing them in HTTP cookies for extra security. And just to explain what JWT tokens are briefly, we have these two tokens here. One's an access token and one's a refresh token. So an access token is used to authenticate our user and it's short-lived. And then our refresh token is used to update our access token when it expires, just building that extra layer of security. So when we call an API like get user details to get this information, we're going to need a correct access token. So just before we get started, a lot of effort goes into this series, so if you could please like and comment on the video and subscribe to the channel as it supports me to keep making these tutorials. So with that all said, let's actually start getting into it. In the last video, we created an API that gets the user profile data, and we call this API when we go to the user profile page here. But at the moment, anyone can get this data even if they're not authenticated. So we want to change that you can only call this API when you are authenticated, okay? And we can do this with Django REST Framework permissions. So before we actually start building our authentication and our login page, we want to make sure that we can't actually access any of the data unless we are authenticated, okay? So if we go to our documentation in Django REST Framework permissions, scroll down so that we're in function-based views as we're implementing function-based views. And we're just going to follow the documentation here, okay? So we'll copy and paste permission classes. So we need to go to base views. We'll import permission classes from decorators. Then we'll import isAuthenticated from permissions. And then we'll implement it just like this, okay? So under our @API view, we had this decorator here called permission classes with an array saying the permissions we're going to set, okay? So isAuthenticated means we can't call this API unless we are authenticated. So once we've done all of this and we go back to our API, if we make a GET request, you see that we're not able to access it anymore. It's going to say authentication credentials were not provided, okay? And if we go to our front end and refresh, you see we don't get this data anymore, okay? So now we're going to build our authentication so that we can get this data. So like I said, we're going to be using JWT tokens to do this, and Django REST Framework supplies a package called Django REST Framework Simple JWT that makes it very easy to build these tokens, okay? So if we just follow the documentation and we can build out these tokens. So if we go to our terminal, we need to install simple JWT. So just copy and paste this, pip install Django REST Framework simple JWT. It's going to install for you. I already have it installed, but just let yours run. And that's everything we need to install. Then we need to go to our backend folder, go into settings.py, and then we're going to make some configurations, okay? So like always, we add REST Framework simple JWT to our installed apps. And then we're also going to add this object here called REST Framework, okay? And it's just going to set some configuration for our APIs. And the configuration it's doing is setting the default authentication. So it's going to change this authentication to be handing JWT tokens, okay? So that's done as well. And then one more thing we need to do is make some edits to the simple JWT settings. As you can see here, when we go to settings, you can implement this object here called simple JWT. So I'll just add it to the top here. You need to close that. And the thing we need to change is, if we go to our model, you can see we set the username as the primary key, but simple JWT by default calls the ID for a user model, okay? But we changed the ID to be the username instead, okay? So we need to set a field that sets the ID to the username instead. So if we get user ID field, by default it would be ID, but we're setting it to username, okay? So now it can grab our users. So that's all the configuration done. now we can actually start building our tokens. And you can see it's very simple when we look at the documentation, that we only have to just import these things here, okay? So we'll grab these imports, go to our euros.py file in base, and we'll import these tokens, okay? And then we're gonna copy and paste these paths and just get rid of these APIs as we're already calling them in our backend urls.py. So now we've got our access token and our refresh token. And just to show you what they do, just copy and paste this. And if instead we call token, it's going to prompt us to log in. So we'll use the user we created in the first video, so MattMakesCode 123, and it's going to provide us with a refresh token and an access token, okay? But at the moment, it's just passing it straight through our API. And we want to change this so that it's storing it in HTTP cookies and then sending it across our API in these cookies, okay, which is going to be far more secure. So that's what we'll do now. The way we're going to do that is by customizing this token class here, and it's very simple to do. So we're just going to copy this and go into our views, paste this here, and we're going to create a new token, which is a custom version of this, okay? So if we create a new class called custom token obtain pair view, which is just custom this, then we're going to inherit this token class here so that we can make some changes to the class. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. Just bring it down. So we're going to make some changes to that. We want to make a post request, so we do that by def post self request args and keyword arguments. Don't worry about these arguments, we just have to pass these through. Now the first thing we want to do is call this function here which we're inheriting, okay, which, like we just saw here, gives us a refresh token and an access token. So we're going to call this function so that we can get these two tokens, and then we're going to do that is just by calling the post request. So we can do that by our response is equal to self.post, sorry, not self, super.post, as it's going to be calling this here, so it's super, and then we'll just pass in these arguments here. So like I said, it's going to be getting our tokens in the data, okay, as it's just returning these. Now we want to grab the access token and the refresh token, and we can just do it by calling this key here called access. So access token equals tokens access, and then the refresh token is tokens and refresh, okay. Now we need to create a response that is going to have these cookies and some data saying that it was a success, okay. So if we create a response, and like always in Django REST framework, we need this response here. So create a response, and we're gonna create some data that's gonna say it was successful, okay. So success is true, and then we're gonna create some cookies. So the way we do that is response.setCookie. First cookie we're going to create is our access token, so the key is going to be called access token, and then it's going to have a value of the access token we just grabbed here. And we need to make some configuration so that we can pass these cookies along securely. So if you just copy these, so HTTP only is going to be true, then we're going to have secure equal true. We have same site equals none, to put that in there, and make sure it has the quotes around them, and then we need to set a path, and we'll set it to the root, okay. So we've made our cookie for our access token, we also need to do it for our refresh token. So we'll just create another cookie here, and then we'll change this to refresh token, and then just copy and paste this into here. So we have a key called refresh token, which is going to have our refresh token as the value. Now we need to return our response, which is going to have our success is true and our two cookies. But at the moment, all of this code is assuming that we've had a successful login, but we need to handle it if a user puts in a wrong username or wrong password. So to do that, we need to put all of this code in a try. So if the login was successful, it's going to execute this. However, if it fails, then it's going to execute this code, and we still need to return a response. So we'll just turn response, and then success is actually false. Okay. Now we've created our custom token for our access token API. We can stop using the default version, so we get rid of that, and then we can import our custom one and replace it. Okay. So if we go to our API token here to get an access token and I'll log in. If I log in now, you see we get success is true instead of the 2 tokens passed through. But this time they'll be stored in our cookies. So if you go into your inspect, then application, then cookies, you'll see you have your access and refresh token here. So that worked perfectly. Next thing we need to do is do one for our refresh token. So create a custom API for our refresh token. And you can see for this API is going to take in the refresh token we already have, which we got from our login. So we pass it our refresh token, and then it's going to give us a new access token, which is because our access token is going to expire, say, every 10 minutes. So we're going to have to call this every 10 minutes so that we can get a new access token. Okay. So the way we're going to do it at the moment, it's doing the default version, but what we need to do is go into our cookies, grab the refresh token we already have, then make the request, and then it's going to give us a new access token, and we can store that access token in our cookies. Okay, if that sounded confusing, it will make sense as we go. So we'll create a new class for our custom refresh. So class custom, then it was token refresh view. Taking that token refresh, then we do the same thing before. We need to make a post request, and in this post request we need to grab the refresh token we already have. So you can see we created the refresh token here, so we're going to grab that from our cookie. So to do that, we go into our request, so we'll just create refresh token. In our request we go into our cookies, and we get the key we set here, and that's going to give us the value of refresh token. Now we need to set it in our request data so that we can call this with our refresh token. Okay, so request.data, set refresh to our refresh token, and then we're gonna do the post call we did there. Okay, but this time it's going to be calling token refresh, which is going to give us our access token. Okay, so if we do tokens dot data, so this is returning our tokens, but we're only interested in the access token, so we can just grab the access token from tokens. If you remember, it returns it in the form of access. Then we're going to create a cookie for that, so we can just copy and paste this, and we're setting successes to true. We need to set response in the first place. There you go. So we've got our response, success is true, and we've got a cookie. Now we need to return our response. So this will happen if we give it the right refresh token, but if we give an incorrect refresh token, then we're going to throw success was false. So just copy that there. There you go. Now we need to make a route for this. So at the moment we're using the default version, so just get rid of that. We'll import our new custom refresh view and then call that here. Okay, and that is it. Now we're going to be able to call our refresh token when our access token expires. Okay, So the next thing we need to do is create our own authentication for cookies instead of just JWT. As if you remember in our settings.py file, we have this default authentication class, which is the REST framework authentication, JWT authentication, okay? So we're going to extend this class here and then create our own authentication, which when we call an API and we want to authenticate an access token, we're going to create our own for our cookies, okay? So to do that, we're first going to make a file called authenticate.py. Then we're going to go to the JWT documentation, and you can see we've got this JWT authentication we just saw here, okay? So we need to import this, and we're going to import it from JWT.authentication, okay? So from REST framework JWT authentication, import this. Okay. Now, so just say that. And now we want to call this authenticate class here. So, wait, first we need to make our class that extends this, okay? So, class, call it cookies authentication. Then we need to extend this JWT authentication so we can make our own. And then we're going to call this authenticate function here, okay? So def authenticate takes self, and it takes one parameter, which is a request, okay? So it takes a request. Now, what we want to do is get our access token, which we're using to authenticate our API, okay? So we're going to grab the access token, we're going to validate it, see if it is valid, if it hasn't expired yet, or if it's a correct access token. And then we're going to return the user from that validated token and the token itself, okay? And you can see that's why we have to return that. We need to return the user and the token, like it says here, return 2-tuple user and token. So like I said, we're first going to get the access token, which we're passing through. So access token request dot cookies. And if I haven't made it clear, we're going to be basically calling this every time we call an API, okay, that needs authentication. So it's going to be calling this every time we call an API that needs authentication. So it's going to grab the access token, and remember we stored it in access token here. So we're grabbing that. We want to check if it even exists. So if it doesn't exist, then just return none, and the authentication will fail. But if it does exist, we're going to create a validated token, which is going to come from the function authenticate. So get validated token, pass in our access token. So let's put this in a try except, okay? So we're going to grab a user from this validated token, but if it fails, then we just want to return none, as they shouldn't be authenticated. But if it does work, we need to return that user and token, okay? So we're going to return the user, and we're going to return that validated token. So now we've got our own cookies authentication. So when we call an API, it's going to authenticate these cookies, and if it works, we're going to be able to get that API that needs to be authenticated. But at the moment, this isn't being called. The default JWT authentication is being called. So just get rid of this, and in base dot authenticate dot cookies authentication, that's going to be our new default authentication class, okay? So when we go back to our browser and we go to our access token, so this will be like our login. Type in MattMakesCode 123, make a post. You can see it was successful, and if we check our cookies, we have an access token and a refresh token, and when we get our data, you can see it actually returns, okay? So even if refresh that. Okay, that's not going to work yet, but we'll be handling that in our React front end. Okay, so yeah, that's our login successful, and all our APIs built for our login. Now what we need to do is start building our login page for our React front end so that we can actually access our user data in the front end. Okay, so we'll get started on that. So I'm back in my text editor, but this time we're going to be building our React front end for our login page and build out the authentication for our actual front end. Okay, so first thing we want to do is create an endpoint to call our login API. So we're going to our API folder, go into endpoints, then we're going to create a new endpoint called login. Okay, synchronous. It's going to take in a username and a password, and then we want to create a response for our API, which is going to be a post. So make that equals, and then just actually we just put it was token / token, and then that should be it. And then we want to return the response dot data. Okay, so one thing we have here is that when we call our APIs, right, we have our access token, and that access token is going to expire. So when we log in here, we're going to get an access token, and it'll expire in about 5 minutes. So we'd have to log in again in 5 minutes. What we want to happen is to refresh this access token when it does expire. So the way we can do this is create an Axios interceptor, which is going to intercept our response. So before it actually gets to our app, it's going to intercept it. And if we get a 401, like a unauthorized, we'll call our refresh API to give us a new access token. And if it's successful, it will give us a new access token. If it's not, then we'll just be logged out. Okay, so we'll create that here. So we're going to do api.interceptors.response.use. Okay, then we need to create our response. So this is if we don't need to update it. Okay. However, if we get an error, so if it does expire, then we're gonna execute the code in here. Okay, so we want to grab our original request, which is going to be our error.config. Okay, we can use this layer. So if our error response, okay, so we're going to check for a 401 error. So if our error response exists and the status request is equal to 401, and also we haven't done this before, okay, so if we get a 401 error, so if it isn't authorized and we haven't done this before, so we haven't tried to refresh it before, then we're going to set this .retry to true so that we don't do it again. And then we're going to try refresh our token and then return our API, okay, with the original request. So to do that, we need to create a refresh token API. So I'll just copy and paste this. Do refresh token, and this will be token refresh. Okay, so we'll call our refresh token, and then we'll return a new request with our new access token. Okay, and then it will finally work. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to get our refresh error, and we're going to take us back to the login page. And we're going to return a rejected promise, okay? And then we need to return this if it doesn't do this anyway. So, and this is going to make sure that if our access token expires, it's going to update it basically if we should be logged in. And that is it for the login APIs. Now we can actually start building our login form. So I'm just going to close this. Actually, did I make an export? Yeah, and that doesn't need to be export. But yeah, close this. Then we're going to go to our routes. Apparently, I've already created one here, but we'll just delete that. So you're going to create a login route here, and we'll do const login. We don't need to return anything yet. And then you just want to import this in our app. And then just create a route for it, okay? This could be a login. So, refresh error is not defined. Oh, that's why. Sorry about that. So if we go to our page and we go to login, then you can see we have this default layout page here because we passed it through layout. Now we actually want to build out this login page. So first of all, we're going to have like a container with a flex. Then we're going to have a visual stack so that we can stack our form components on top of each other. Then if we actually just go to our browser and type in chakra form control, go to form control here. We're just going to copy this element here. Okay. So if we copy that, get rid of that, we don't need that. Then we'll make that text, we don't even need that. But that should be text. It should be username. Call that username. Then you're going to copy and paste this. We'll make this password. Password. It's the password. There you go. And then we need a button to actually log us in. Okay. So when we go to our React app, obviously we need to import all of these. So do flex. Form control, input, and button. Okay. And then form label. Before I mess one up. There you go. So that's going to give us this here. We can also give it a bit of a heading, so to know we're at the login page. So there you go, we got that. Now I want to center this in the center of the page. So to do this horizontally, we need to make the width 100%, and we're going to justify content to be center. Okay, and to make it center in the page, you would always have to do align items center. Okay, but this isn't going to work because it's not extending the whole height of the page. And if I do height equals 100 visual height, you can see it's not actually at the center because this navbar is pushing it down. So we need to do 100 visual height minus the height of the navbar, which, if you see here, is 90 pixels. Okay. So to do that, we can do calc, then in brackets, do 100 VH minus 90 pixels. You can see it's going to be more centered here. Okay. So with that done, then we'll just add some styling. So we can make this 100, or we'll say 95% of the container for mobile Okay, so at the moment it's 95%, but once it reaches 400 pixels, then it won't get any bigger, okay? But if it's getting smaller than this width, so if it's mobile, it's going to be 95%. Then we'll say align items at the start, so that the text isn't at the start there. Then we need to separate these components, so give it a gap of 30 pixels. So it looks a bit better. We'll make this button 100% and we'll give it a color scheme of green. And we'll make the font size a bit bigger. So that looks a bit better, and then we just need to make the background for these inputs white. That should be it for the styling. So that looks a lot better, okay? Now what we need to do is actually make this authentication work, okay? So you want to create a function called handle login. It's going to be asynchronous as we're making the API call, and it's going to be await login, okay? It's going to take in a username and a password, and it's going to be called when we click the button, okay? So on click, it's going to handle login. So we need to get this username and password from somewhere. So we're going to get it from these input fields here. So to do this, we need to create a state and create a state called username, set username, set use state. This will be defaulted to none because when we load the page, there won't be anything in the input. Let's copy and paste this, and we'll do one for password as well. And then when we type in these fields, we want to update the username, and then when we type in this, it updates the password. So on change, we're gonna set the username to be what's in the input, okay? So that's how we do that. We do the same for input, for the password, but we do set password. And now that's going to log in for username and password. But we need to check if it was successful. So we do const success, or we'll do const data equals await login. If data.success, as if you remember, we passed in success, just load it up here. We pass success in our response. So if data success, then we're gonna nav to profile page. Else, we're gonna just throw an error and say invalid username or password, okay? Now, to navigate to the username page, we're going to use something called use navigate. So import use navigate. We need to create the navigation. Navigate, use navigate, and then we're gonna navigate to the profile page, okay, which is gonna be our username. And then you need to put a slash before that. So hopefully this all works. So if I do MattMakesCode 1, 2, 3, and that threw an error. So let's see what we've done. Okay, so we didn't take username and password as a body, okay? So we never actually passed our username and password through our API. So just insert the user and password like this for our API. Now, if we do it again, you see that we log into our page and we've got all our user details, okay? So that was the login part of the video. Now we're gonna go on to do the register part of the video. This part's gonna be a lot shorter. and it's going to be a bit less complex as well. So we're going to build out our register API in our backend, and then we'll build out the front end again. So back in our text editor, we want to go into backend, go into base, and open serializers. And this is where we're going to start building our registration, okay, in our backend. So we need to create a user register serializer that's going to take in all the data we put in our front end, such as our username, email, password, etc. And then in our serializer, we're going to create a create function that's going to create that user, okay? And then after this, we'll make an API that's just going to call the serializer. So it's very simple in the backend. So we'll create this serializer, user register serializer, and then it's going to be the same, serializers dot model serializer. So we're going to have to do class meta like usual, state the field we're using, which we're going to register, which is our user, so my user. And then we also need to state the fields that are going to require in the registration, okay? So we're going to pass through our username, we're going to pass through the user's email, we're going to pass through the user's first name, and the user's last name. And you're probably thinking, where did these attributes come from? As in our models.py file, we haven't got any of these, but these come with the default user model, which we're extending with abstract user, if you remember from part 1, okay? So we need these to create a user. Then we also have to pass in the password. But for this to work, in the serializer, we have to make the password write only so that it can't be read, okay? Which makes it secure. So serializers dot char field, and then we need to set it to write only equals true. Okay, so we've stated the fields and password can't be read. Now we need to create the create function I was talking about. That's going to create our user model. So it's like this. It's create self like usual, and then it's going to take in some data. So we're going to call it validated data. And then in here, we're going to create the user object. So user equals my user, and then pass in the fields. So we have the username, which is going to come from validated data username. So what we're passing in from the front end. And then we're going to have email, which is going to be validated data email. Just tidy it out. So then the same for first name. So validated data first name, and then last name equals validated data last name. Okay, but we're not going to pass the password through here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this function that's preset called set password. And that's going to hash our password so it's stored safely in our database, okay? Otherwise, if we saved it in here, it would just save it in plain text, which is not secure at all and not safe for production. So set password, validated data, pass in the password. Then we need to save this user into our database with user.save, and then we'll just return the user, okay? So this is our serializer. So we've got our password, we've stated the fields, we create it with this function. Now in our views, we're going to create an API that calls the serializer, okay? So just above these, we'll create a new API. It's going to be a post request. And you won't need permissions to do this because obviously you're not going to be logged in if you're registering a new user. So call it register, which takes in request. Okay, call our serializer. So we need to import it first. User register serializer. Then the data we're going to pass through. So that's going to be the request data, which is what we're sending through from the front end. Now we need to check if our serializer is valid, and then we do serializer.save, okay, which is going to save our user to our database. Then we need to return our serializer.data in our response, okay, and the serializer.data is going to be the user returned here, okay. Now if it isn't valid, so it's going to skip past this, then we just need to return response with the serializer.errors. Okay, so that's a bit failed. And now this is our register API. We can go into our URLs, import register, and then create a new route. Just like that. And then if we go in our browser, and I just copy and paste this, create a new window, but we'll go to register this time. Register. There you go. And we need to build out our user. So we're passing in a username, email, first name, last name, and password. So if I do, tell you what, let's do it like that. Username, we'll do JWT this time, and then email. So it's like that. And then password. We'll do JWT this time, and then email. So it's like that. And then password. There you go. So make sure it's all in double quotes as well. And that looks good to me. If I post, we get returned this user here. And if we go back to our token and we log into JWT 123, you see success is true. And we can also do it here instead. So if I go to login, do JWT 123, it's going to log me in. Obviously we don't have any bio or anything like that, which we'll set in our user settings and our edit profile here, but we get logged in, we don't get an error. So that's worked perfectly. Now what we need to do is build the register in our front end. So back in our Visual Studio Code, we want to create our register route, okay, our register page. So if we go into source and we go into routes, we're going to create register.js. We actually just copy and paste our login page here because it's going to be very, very similar. And then we can just adjust it from here, which will be a lot quicker and easier. So we're going to want a username and password, but we're going to have a few extra fields, which are going to be confirm password and set confirm password. We've also got the fields we need to pass through in our register, such as email, first name, last name. So email, set email. Right, like this. And then instead of handle login, we have handle register, but we'll fill this logic once we create our API endpoint. And then we're going to have to change our form, so we're going to make more fields here. So if I just copy and paste this, so this would be our email. Create this as an email type and set email. We'll have to repeat this, so do first name, last name, we bring our password to the bottom here, we're going to have two of these, where the second one's going to be set confirm password, then confirm password. Just like that. And then it's going to be register. Then handle register. And then, yeah, that looks good to me. So if we add this root to our app, so we need to import it. Oh, we haven't changed the component name. Register, then register up here. So import register. We go create a new root called register. And then we can go into our app. If we type in register, sorry. You see that comes up here. So we might have to change the spacing a bit. So if we change that to 20, looks a lot better. So now we need to create an API field, okay? An API endpoint. So just copy and paste this one, turn it to register. It's going to take in a username, email, first name, last name, and then a password. So we'll just pass those through. And then we'll confirm the password in our handle register, okay? So let me just check that's register. That's good to me. So if password, actually we'll call, yeah, if password equals confirm password, then we'll call our register, else we'll alert password and confirm password are not identical. But if they are, then we're going to call our register, so await register, and put this in a try and catch. Actually, we'll set that. Do if response dot success. No, sorry, it's right first time. Let's try catch, because we didn't return success for the register. So try catch. The catch will throw an error, so we'll just alert error registering. But if there was no error, we'd pass in our username, our email, first name, last name, password. So we did username, email, first name, last name, password. And we get rid of that. We can alert successful registration. And we can navigate to login. Okay. So looks pretty good to me. Just refresh that. So I'll do MattMakesCode 2, matt@email.com. I'm just going to be filling things in. Matt settings 123 123. It's error registering. Just bring up this here. It's because we passed in first name as an underscore. So if we do last name like that. And then we should probably do the same for everything else. So username, email, then password. And hopefully this works. There you go, successful registration. And we can log in with MattMakesCode 2 and 1, 2, 3. There you go, perfect. So one thing I want to do now, just to top it all off, we just want to have a link here that's going to take us to our register page, and then a link that takes us to our login page. So I'll just do it under the button. So we'll have a visual stack, because it's going to be right under our button. And then we'll have to make this the full width of our container, so our button still is. And then we'll also have to align items to the start so that our text will stay at the start instead of being at the center, okay? So with that said, we'll do text already have an account login. Do it like that. And on click. We'll just create a function that navigates us to our login page. Then we can copy this for our login page. So that'll be register. Then we also copy just this here. But instead that'll be login, and this will be don't have an account, sign up. So handle, change that, and then also import text in both files. There you go. So we could probably make that a little smaller. Say 16 pixels. Or we'll do 14 pixels. We'll say color is grey.600. There you go. We'll do say 500. That's why it's not changing. There you go. So we'll just copy, paste that, give it a gap of like 10 pixels. There you go. So that's our login and register page, and that is the end of the video. So at the moment, if I log in to MattMakesCode 1, 2, 3, you can see we log in here. But if I get rid of our cookies, you can see we're still allowed on the page. So in the next video, I'm going to teach you how to build something called private routes in React, and it's not going to allow us to access the app at all if we're not logged in, okay? But for this video, that's all I've got for you. Like I said before, a lot of effort goes into this series, so if you could like and comment on the video and subscribe to the channel, we really appreciate it. But in the meantime, thank you so much. See you.